The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session. It is January 8th, 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. We are now officially in the year 2025, and oh my goodness, has this year already gone off to a pretty, I would say, like, just trying to find the word to describe, quite crazy, okay? So on January 5th, the Ukrainians started a counteroffensive for some odd reason in the Kursk direction, with the objective to, I guess, divert some Russian resources away from both Donbas and the Kharkiv directions. And for a while, it looked like they were going to capture a couple of villages, especially the villages of Novo Sotnitsky and Burden. But only a day or two after this offensive started, it already flopped. Literally fizzled out. Like, literally, Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive in the Kursk direction. The mainstream media was going bonkers about it. It was like on the CNN front page or so for like a day. And then when it became clear that the Russians had the upper hand in this area, they immediately removed that the updates for the counteroffensive from the front page of CNN because they failed. So not only has the counteroffensive in Kursk already failed, now I'm going to be honest with you guys, all right? I do believe before Trump is inaugurated, the Ukrainians are going to try another counteroffensive in a different direction. Now, some say it's going to be in another part of Kursk. Some say it's going to be in the Belgorod region. Some say it could even be in Bryansk, which would be, I think, right in this area here. Yeah, that's like bordering the Chernigov region. Sorry, I almost said Bryansk, but I'm really trying to say Chernigov region. So yeah, there were even rumors that the Ukrainians were going to try a counteroffensive from Kamensky and to try to reach the town of Vasilivka, but nothing has materialized there. Some people even go as far as to saying, why not try to take the Energodar nuclear power plant? Which many say that if the Ukrainians were to ever recapture, they would then have something on the table to bargain with. Like, they could ask the Russians for territory back. Or no, like, I don't know. Like, what I think their, logic is that if they were to capture the ZNPP, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, they would have to force the Russians to, basically give up the power plant in return for the areas in Kursk. But as we know by now, the Russians will not tolerate this, and that is why they're currently on the counteroffensive right now themselves. And this is kind of funny. It's sort of like some cartoony Tom and Jerry slapstick shit. Literally 1 to 2 days after the Ukrainians start a counteroffensive in Kursk, the Russians then do a counteroffensive. And as far as I know, this counteroffensive has actually been successful. The Russians have reportedly taken the village or recaptured the village of Leonovo and are on the brink of recapturing the village of Alexandria. Sorry, I thought it said Andriivka, but in reality it just says Alexandria. The village of Kruglinkoy has been recaptured, and there's reports that in the Malia Lochnia direction, the Ukrainians are losing a lot of ground. And there's reports that they're already in a cauldron. But take that with a grain of salt because we don't have any confirmation of that yet. But as far as I know, they are in big trouble up there in the northern part, by the way, of their Kursk pocket. Now, going a little southwards, so when I made my last Hague video in December 2024, I left you guys like on a cliffhanger when it comes to this direction, and it appears the Russians are already knocking on the doors of Suja. In fact, they just took one suburb of it already, Makhnovka, and they are on the brink of entering the villages of Dmitrukov and Zamatsui, or Zamatsy. And then after that, they're already in Suja. Well, along with, I probably forgot to mention Kolmakov and Bondarivka, Agronom. But yeah, you get the point. The Russians are on the brink of re-entering Suja for the first time since, I think around like mid-August or so. I don't know when they lost Suja itself, but they're on the brink of re-entering the town for the first time since summer of 2024. And as far as I can see, I just don't see the armed forces of Ukraine being able to hold on to this town for as long as they think. In fact, I honestly don't even know if the Ukrainians are going to put up a fight for Suja. But if they do, that would be stupid. In fact, that's what the Russians would want them to do. Because if they were to try to turn Suja into another, let's say, Bakhmut or Artyomovsk, obviously the place is going to get flattened to the ground, but also this means that a lot of Ukrainians will be martyred. They will be killed, which will deprive them or deplete their resources even more on the manpower side of things. Ukraine is already struggling to find new recruits for their armed forces, and the fact that they still keep doing this Kursk offensive, it's just, I don't know what's going on in Kiev, but they're definitely smoking something. Maybe I should have some of that just so I can relax a little bit about 2025. But yeah. And also, in the light of the failures in Kursk, there was a report that Trump's envoy to Ukraine, who won't be officially in office until, well, Trump's inaugurated, which will be on the 20th of this month, he reportedly was getting ready to go to Kiev to discuss what's going on here. But then this offensive happened, and it failed quickly, which resulted in Keith Kellogg, the guy who has been assigned the envoy for the U.S. to Ukraine. He has already called off his trip, which leads me to believe that there is nothing really to discuss, because this counteroffensive here was an absolute failure. Though, as I said, it's possible it may not be the main offensive. I don't know. But keep an eye on the other directions, like Bryansk, Belgrade, Zaporozhye region, whatever. All the above. Keep an eye on every region. We don't know what can happen, as we saw in 2022. We thought Kherson was going to be the main direction of attack for the Ukrainians, when in reality it was really the Kharkiv direction. And speaking of Kharkiv direction, we got some breaking news coming out of this area. So, first of all, the Ukrainians have conducted a somewhat successful counteroffensive. They have retaken around half, if not most, of the village of Kolesnikivka. But that's really about it. The Russians, however, even though they're no longer in Kupiansk, they are about to make up for that defeat in the town of Dorichna. Now, while Suryak has not colored this in yet, Deep State UA, surprisingly, has this whole area under a gray zone, including the commie blocks here, like the only commie blocks in Dorichna. Which leads me to believe, and considering how copy the gray zones are from Deep State, it is highly likely that Russia has captured already 75% of the town. And if this news were to be confirmed, this is bad news for the Ukrainians, because after Dorichina, it's mostly nothing but just tiny little villages for quite some time. Now, obviously, there's going to be some maybe fortifications and such, but I don't see the Russians really having a lot of trouble in the Kharkov region after they take Dorichina. Like, if they really wanted to, they can start maybe a new cross-border operation and basically try to retake everything in the Kharkiv direction that they lost during September 2022. Now, I don't know if they're going to do this at this time, but I know for a certainty that at some point in the future, the Russians will finally capture Volchansk. I don't know when it will happen. I mean, the place is basically now rubble. Like, there's nothing left. It's in even worse shape than even Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. Far worse shape. But I know for a fact that somewhere in 2025, the Russians are going to start conducting an offensive in this area. Like, if all goes according to plan in other parts of the front, like, let's just say they kick out the Ukrainians from Kursk, okay? What I think will then happen is that those guys who were in charge of the Kursk offensive will then be deployed to the Kharkiv direction. So those guys are going to come back to Kharkiv after they were forced to pause the offensive during summer, and then they will go essentially where they left off. And Putin would give them, for instance, the objective of, okay, guys, we're going to retake everything we lost in 2022, September 2022, that is, and try to restore our legitimacy over the Kharkov Oblast in far eastern Ukraine. I believe that retaking everything like east of the Servetsky Donets River will be an objective for Russia in 2025. Not just retaking Kupiansk, not just retaking Borova, and by the way, they're already attacking in the direction of Borova, by the way. In fact, they just took Lazova, this village here, and I guess some farm areas or something like that. But I'm absolutely certain that in 2025, the Russians, as part of their objectives, will try to retake everything they lost in September 2022 on the Oskar River here, like the eastern side, but also try to retake as much as possible that they lost in the infamous Ukrainian counteroffensive almost 3 years ago. So yeah, I believe that will be an objective. In fact, right now, I've even heard reports that the Ukrainians are already starting to build fortifications and trenches or something around Izium and Balaklaya. They know there is now a very high possibility, with the Ukrainians becoming more and more depleted, that the Russians will return to these towns. It's looking more and more likely. Now, but anyway, let's go down a little southwards past the Oskar River and talk about what's going on in the Liman direction. Now, believe it or not, everybody, this is real. The village of Terny has finally fallen to Russia after basically a year or two of back and forth fighting. Literally, the Ukrainians looked like they had the Russians bogged down here, but it had to happen eventually. The Russians finally retook Terny, and the Russians also recaptured the village of Ivanovka. And from here, they will try to advance southwards, or maybe northwards, I guess, towards Borova, I guess. I don't know what will happen in this direction, but what I am certain, though, is that part of 2025, the Russians want to recapture the town of Liman, or Krasny Liman, as the Russians would sometimes call it. I think that was its original name during the Soviet era, during under the communist. But yeah, they want Liman back. It was literally one of the biggest losses in that big counteroffensive. They didn't lose just Volchansk, Dorichina, Kupiansk, Borova, Izium, Balaklaya. They lost Liman, which was, by the way, one of their key, basically keys to the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk metropolitan area. Without Liman, they were essentially not going to be able to take Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. But yeah, there's even reports, by the way, coming in from Divjin, the Sofa General Staff, which is a pro-Russian source, that Ukrainians have already been pushed back even further. And that it's looking more and more likely that these villages here outside of Liman are going to be contested soon. And once this happens, then Liman will once again be in danger of another Russian takeover. Now, if Liman falls back to Russia, then the Russians will once again be at the doorstep of Slavyansk, but I don't think they're going to enter it because, as I said in one of my past videos, the Russians need to take back everything they lost in September 2022. No excuses. They cannot just simply stop at 4 provinces and call it a day. No. It will have to be the former. The Russians need to retake everything they lost during September 2022 in the Kharkov Oblast, but maybe next time they can expand their control of Kharkiv. Like, for instance, maybe try to go, like, let's just say they retake Izium for some reason. They could then try to go for the town of Kurakhove right here, which looks a little difficult because I do think there are some commie blocks here. I don't know, but they definitely need to expand that buffer zone around Izium, like, even further, and which would then give the Russians basically the advantage over the Ukrainians in the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk metropolitan area. So yeah. But yeah, the Russians are advancing in the Liman direction, which is shocking because this part of the front has been stagnant for years. But now it seems like it is finally cracking, though I don't think it's going as fast, though, as it is in the rest of Donetsk Oblast. And speaking of the rest of Donetsk Oblast, let's talk about it. So, first of all, let's go to Chasiv Yar. Yes, folks, this is also not a joke. The Russians have now apparently supposedly cut off a good chunk of Chasiv Yar from supplies. Now, I don't know how true this particular report is here from Suryak, but if this is to be true, this is really bad news for the Ukrainians because the Russians will then have fire control over these roads down here, like all the way like to the south. I mean, this area is pretty much cut off, but like the only way they're going to get into downtown Chasiv Yar is through the southern like roads, and even that is not going to be safe. It's all like rugged, dirty roads that are like in disrepair. I mean, it's not safe. But yeah, Russians have taken a good chunk of western Chasiv Yar, though I think they still need to take these parts under their control before they are able to completely isolate the center part of Chasiv Yar. But let it be known, folks, the Russians are closer than you think to victory in Chasiv Yar. And I will explain why right now. Going south is Toretsk. And when you look at that, Toretsk is pretty much now under partial Russian control. Apparently, the city is in ruins, but I don't know how bad it is when compared to Bakhmut and, let's also say, Mariinka and Volchansk. But this battle has been going on since summer 2024, so almost half a year or so. It's been pretty long. Now, the reason why the Russians didn't take Toretsk and Chasiv Yar so quickly, because a lot of people thought, like, after the Russians took the commie blocks, like in Toretsk, in fact, I remember very well that these were the first buildings to fall. I thought these were going to hold for a long time, but no, that wasn't the case. The Russians quickly took these commie blocks, and then they just slowly expanded from here. That really shocked me, and I was like, oh my goodness, this battle might actually go by quickly. But no, that didn't happen. Not just because the Ukrainians were so hesitant on not wanting to lose Toretsk, but also, well, along with Chasiv Yar. But here's the thing. The events in Toretsk and Chasiv Yar, as crucial as they are nowhere as vital as the Pokrovsk direction. And I'll get to that in a moment. And because of that, the Russians and the Ukrainians diverted their more valuable resources away from those fronts and took them to Pokrovsk. And I guess also the southern Donetsk direction. But yeah, so as you can see, the Russians now appear to have control of every single commie block and all the regional government buildings in the area, along with the sports stadium here. And they are also about to take the remaining residential areas in Toretsk as well. So the city is about to fall within the next couple of days or so. Though I still think that the Ukrainians will try their hardest to hold on to these landfill terracons here, but I think they're going to fall without a fight. And there will not be that much of a fight for this industrial zone here, because the more important industrial zone in Toretsk has already been taken by Russia, and also the Zabolka district is now under solid Russian control. So if you're like a Russian vehicle or something, you can now travel through here and supply the troops, which will then accelerate the advances in the area. So yeah, Toretsk is about to fall to Russia, and once this happens, Chasiv will fall quicker. Toretsk is, in my opinion, what's keeping Chasiv from falling. But once Toretsk is gone, which it's about to be, Chasiv is cooked too. So yeah. Now, moving on to, in my opinion, my favorite front right now, the most interesting front of the whole war, the Pokrovsk direction. Now, oh my goodness, look at that. You see, a lot of Ukraine fanboys, NAFO boomers like to talk about how, oh, this isn't much land. The Russians did not reach Kiev or take Kharkiv. Well, guess what? It's a war of attrition, and territory doesn't matter as much as manpower does, and vehicles too. The Ukrainians are losing a lot of both. Now, obviously, people can say, oh, the Russians are losing a lot of stuff too. And yeah, that is true. But the difference, though, between the two is that the Russians can take the punches. The Ukrainians cannot. Any vehicle they lose and any men that they lose cannot be replaced. It cannot be replaced. Yeah, sorry if I didn't add the D at the end, but you get my point. They cannot replace that shit. And because of that, it will cause the Russians to advance even further, if not faster. And recently in the Pokrovsk direction, last year in February 2024, it all started in Avdiivka. And now we are all the way to the gates of Pokrovsk itself. And in my opinion, this is going to go down as one of the most important bouts of the entire war by far. Pokrovsk and Myonograd, their importance cannot be literally described enough. I don't know what else to tell you. If Ukraine loses Myonograd and Pokrovsk, the road to Konstantinivka will be not only just wide open for Russia, well, not just from Chasiv and Toretsk, but also a certain oblast who I have annoyed people with, will become a target of Russia in 2025 and beyond. My friends, I'm of course talking about the dreaded Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. I talked about it a lot in my videos before I went on my hiatus. I'm still talking about it now, and the Russians are like 7 kilometers away from entering the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Yeah, literally. So, yeah, recently the Russians have captured the villages of Slavyanka, Petropavlivka, Shevchenko, Ukrainka, Chamatsky, Novolinivka, Novojili-Zavativka, Novobasilivka, Salone, and reportedly Vovkove as well, and also half of Pischine. This is a disaster in the making for the armed forces of Ukraine. And there's even report now that the road, that one of like the remaining supply routes for the Ukrainians, the T0406 road, has reportedly been cut or contested by the Russians. If the Russians take control of this road here, that is a massive, massive blow to the Ukrainians' chances of holding on to the city of Pokrovsk. Now, if they lose this road, then the next road wouldn't be that far away. The E50 road. And if they lose E50, it's pretty much game over for the Ukrainians in Pokrovsk. They may have no choice but to basically just leave the city, because then they would get pretty much encircled. And speaking of which, I know what you're thinking, but what about the Konstantinivka road? Well, guess what? The Russians just started a new push in this area after this area being stagnant for some months now. The Russians have taken full control over the village of Bazdyzhinka, and have also taken a part of Yelizadivka. And with the taking of this particular village, well, also this one, the Russians are about to cut this key road here, like the junction. You know, like the roundabout area. Like, this is like the T0504 road that goes to Konstantinivka and effectively Sylviansk and Kramatorsk. This is literally one of the lifelines for Pokrovsk. So if the Russians cut off this road here, along with cutting off the E50 and the T0406 road, Pokrovsk only really has like around maybe 2 supply roads left. But otherwise, it's mostly encircled or turned into a cauldron, as Dima of Military Summary would say. So yeah. Now, as for Dnipropetrovsk, I believe that the Russians will soon begin the actual push to enter the province very soon. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I will give it 1 month. Next month, I guess before the Super Bowl here, the Russians will be knocking at the gates of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. All of these small villages here, which are not really much, by the way, should fall to Russia easily. And once that happens, then the Russians will literally be at the doorstep of the province of Dnipropetrovsk, which, by the way, is the second largest oblast land-wise in Ukraine, and is also the second largest population-wise in all of Ukraine. But yeah, so, yeah, if the Russians take these roads here, along with all these villages, that's like behind, like north of Andriivka, then they will be in Dnipropetrovsk without problems. But I think it's coming a lot sooner than you all think it is. I don't know when it will happen, but it's coming. And yes, folks, the Battle of Kurakhove is over. Right before the end of the New Year, like celebrations, literally right just as the clock was about to strike midnight in my country, I think, the Russians took control over the city of Kurakhove. Or should I now say Kurakhovo, which I think is the Russian translation. They've taken control of every single block in the city, the suburbs, they've taken control of the outskirt villages, and they've now taken control over especially, I guess even, yeah, the industrial zone too has now been taken over as well by the Russians. The Russians are also advancing towards the village of Razliv, and are also advancing towards the villages of Konstantinopol and Ulaki. They're even also putting the village of Dachny under pressure too. I think they're going to run away. I don't think they're going to put up much of a fight here. I just don't. But this, sorry about that, but this area here is pretty much a pocket, and the Ukrainians will have no choice but to leave. They got to go right now. No exceptions. This area is cooked. And so is Velika Novosilka. In fact, there have been reports of new advances outside of Velika Novosilka lately. Russians are basically now in control of the road leading into Velika Novosilka, like one of the last roads into it. And yeah, while there is no reports of fighting in Niskuchne yet, the Ukrainians are now all but pretty much encircled in Velika Novosilka. There's no way out from the north. There's no way out from the east. There's now no way out from the west. There are no ways for the Ukrainians in Velika Novosilka to, not surrender, but to break out of the encirclement. They are doomed. Literally, they are doomed indeed. And in fact, things have gotten so bad that the Russians have flew in a drone with a mic, built into it, like a speaker, and sent them a voice message telling them, "Everybody, please surrender. Your lives will be spared," or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, they offered them, I guess, maybe a pardon or something. I don't know, but they're telling them to lay down their weapons and surrender, control these areas here. And so far, their central command has not given them the orders to do so. But I bet a lot of Ukrainians are going to surrender without the consent of the government itself. And then Velika Novosilka will fall without that much of a fight. So yeah, everybody, that is pretty much going to do it for today's video. So I hope once again that you all had a great Happy New Year and a Merry Christmas. And speaking of which, Orthodox Christmas was just the other day within Eastern Europe, and I guess any country that celebrates it. And I hope it went well for those people too. So yeah, I guess I hope all of you have a great day. And I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be next Sunday. So take care, everybody, and stay safe. Peace out. P.S. Rest in peace, Jimmy Carter.